Hello everyone, it's Karen at the Cool Tools Studio, and today we're making sterling silver bangles. These bangles were made using Cool Tools EZ925 Sterling Silver Clay. They're sturdy and stackable, so I like to make several at a time because they look great worn as a group. Let's get going by taking a look at what you need to make these bangles. To make these bangles, you need a work surface, and then an additional larger tough card that you can take things off to dry on, some smaller tough cards, an ultra clay pick, a brush for water, and then some sanding pads. I also have a cup-shaped size 2 extra firm clay shaper, a sanding stick, some stones, and then I like to work with these coordinated punches for the interior. So today I'm going to be setting a square, so I have a square punch. And then you're also going to need some string, just for taking measurements. I have some cool slip, a clay extruder, clay thickness rolling frames, a tissue blade, a snake maker, and today I'm working with EZ925 Sterling Silver Clay. I have a bangle template and then a water dish. If you need to add any of these tools to your collection, there's a link in the description below to shop for them. For this project, I like to start off by setting my stones, and for the one I'm going to be showing today, I'm just setting a singular stone. I'm doing a similar style to this, but I also like to do some bangles where I set multiple stones in one bangle. I think it kind of just adds to the stack. But for the sake of today, I'm just going to show setting the one stone. And I'm going to be prepping my work area and my acrylic sheet with some cool slip so my clay doesn't stick. And I'm doing the stone setting method where you set your stone down on its table and then slide side to side, and you're looking for the stone to stay put. So right now my setting would not be deep enough. So I'm going to swap out this 2 and go up to a 3, and it's not moving anymore. So I've got my work surface cool slipped, my acrylic sheet cool slipped, and I'm ready to make myself a little patty of clay. So I'm going to set that down. I'm going to press. And I like to use these stone setting punches for cutting out the interior of my settings. And I'll just take a little cool slip off to the side. Kind of dip my punch in. I'm pushing straight down and pulling straight up. And it gives you the perfect little seat for setting your stone. Set my stone in place, and then I'm pushing firmly down. That's going to set my stone. And then at this point, what I like to do is just take a tissue blade, because sometimes it's really tricky to line up punches for cutting the exterior of your settings. So instead, with a tissue blade, you're able to just kind of look from above, and I'll just kind of roughly cut the shape of my setting here. It's kind of sticking some. I thought I put enough cool slip on there, but apparently not. That's okay. Just kind of bop him back in, and once I'm done cutting this edge, I'll make sure that I reapply pressure on the top to make sure my stone is properly in its seat. But I'm just kind of roughly cutting the shape, and then once this is dried, I'll use a sanding stick and sanding pad to make sure my shape is perfect. So now I'm putting these back over top and pressing down firmly one more time to make sure my stone didn't get unseated and pulling away my tissue blade there. So I'm going to take this off to dry completely and start forming the bangle. So for creating my bangle, I'm bringing an extra work surface. That way I can just take this off to dry and I won't be distorting my form or shape or anything by trying to pick it up off of my clay board. And I'm taking some fresh clay and I'm putting it into my extruder. The extruder comes with lots of different shapes and sizes for different extrusions, but I'm just working with a kind of mid-sized circle here. And I kind of just make this a cylinder to slide it in. And before I start extruding, you need to know how long you need to make your coil. So for this, you can either look up online, like the circumference of average bangles if you're just making them generally for an inventory. But if you're making them for yourself, you want to measure the widest part of your hand, approximately. I'll kind of let my hand relax a little bit so you don't have to like crush your hand to get your bangle on. And mark where those ends line up and cut to size. And then for this project, I took this string and I scaled it up by 21% to accommodate for the shrink while firing. So this larger string is how long I need to make my extruded coil to be to create my bangle. So now I'm twisting down, and I try to do this all in one go. I find kind of pausing and starting again will create kinks in the extruded coil. So I'll go until I'm pretty confident that's more than enough. And I'll look for good spots in the clay. And this is going to be my seam anyways, so I'm going to be putting a stone there and kind of disguising that rough spot. But if you were really worried about that, you could clean that up pretty handily with a brush. And I'm trimming it to be the length of my string. So now I want to make it kind of generally round, and Cool Tools has these bangle templates that I like to just set on top of my extra work surface here. And I just kind of gently nudge it against this edge to make it round. And you can take your string and put it inside the template to kind of pre-check to see which size circle you need to be using and working with. But I've done this bangle a couple of times now, so I knew I was working with 3.25. And I'm not worried about closing up this end because when it comes time to apply my setting, I'm going to be cutting and removing space anyways. So at this point, I just kind of, sometimes will take a damp brush if it's sticking a little bit. But basically, you just want it generally rounded. That way when you fire it, it'll hopefully keep it most of its form. You can form it a little bit after it's fired if it distorts some, but you want it to be generally round and to dry in a generally round form. All right, so that got a little distorted, so I'm going to kind of nudge it really quickly back again. But again, sort of round. You can perfect it once it's fired on a bracelet mandrel, but the less moving you have to do fired, the better. So now this is going to go join my setting on the hot plate until it's completely dry. My setting has dried, so I'm going to take some time with the sanding stick to kind of just refine the shape a little bit. I am eventually going to be building it back up and transitioning it into the bangle, so I'm not really going to worry about making sure it's perfect or that my lines are, exactly even because I'm going to be beefing it up anyways, but there's just kind of some roundness here, and just giving myself a true shape to start with will help building up my bangle symmetrically go a little more smoothly. So I'm just taking my sanding stick and kind of truing up my edges a little bit to make it a proper square. And then again, I'm going to be building up material around this, so I'm not going to bother using the sanding sponges to refine the surface or anything. I'm just taking a little bit of time to correct my shape. So now that my setting has been refined a little bit and my bangle is dry, I'm going to kind of decide how I want my stone oriented, and then I'm going to use a tissue blade to trim away the extra clay there. So I'll just kind of set it up on its corner and then line up with the one corner here and make sure that sometimes the first time I went to go do this, I was paying attention to here for my cut, and then I also cut the back of my bangle over there. So be mindful of where your blade ends when you're doing this. So I'm following this line down with my tissue blade and cutting the excess, and then I'm going to repeat that on the other side. Following down. Just taking that extra away. And this clay has some stickiness to it, which is really convenient for this type of process, where I'm just going to take a little bit of the clay, and then I've got my clay shaper here, and I'm just kind of pressing just a little bit of water into it to make it slightly softer for this connection. But I'm picking up a good amount of material there, because I'm going to be kind of transitioning from the point anyways. It's not like a very small, precise connection, so I'm just kind of lobbing it on there, really. And then I'm going to take my setting and kind of press in, and then I'm putting a finger underneath my setting there to just really kind of spread the material out a little bit to maximize the connection. But again, I'm not really worried about this being cute or clean. It's just to hold that stone setting to the bangle to attach it. Back down here, my work surface, picking up a little bit more damp clay. And then this clay does have some flexibility, so I'm kind of pulling it open just a little bit and applying the material. And then again, I've got my finger below to support the stone, pressing in there. And then just sort of smoothing it out. And then at this point, like I said, it's pretty sticky, but I'm going to very carefully take it and set it on my work surface. And make sure, sometimes when you set it down, your setting will kind of skew a little bit. You just want to make sure that it looks like it's sitting nice straight up and down. And then we're going to completely dry this connection before we add more material to smooth out the transition from the setting to the bangle. If you were trying to add material at this point, you would just kind of nudge your connections and make them weaker. So we're going to dry this first. So these connections have dried, and now I'm ready to transition from the setting into the bangle to kind of make it look seamless in form. And for that, I'm again going to be working with my clay shaper, and I just kind of pinch off clay and we'll kind of pre-shape it to be sort of tapered on one end, sort of squared on the other. So it's sort of triangular-ish, kind of rounded. And I'll use my clay shaper to dampen where I'm going to be placing those. And then I just press down really quickly to initially apply them. And then I'll take my clay shaper and kind of press up and over and really just kind of blend that blob out. This clay does have, it really readily kind of has like a surface melt to it where it slips up really handily. And I'll kind of go behind, and there's some extra material back there. I'm going to kind of drag it up in front here some. But it works really, really nicely with a damp clay shaper, and it smooths really nicely this way as well. I will be doing some sanding to refine it, but you can get some pretty good surfaces with wet refinement with this clay. But I'm just establishing the shape at this point. I'll kind of round it out over here. And sometimes I'll end up doing this in like 2 or 3 steps. Like once this is dry, I might look and notice, oh, there's kind of a low area, and I'll come back in and I'll add some more material there. But this is just sort of the initial forming. And then sometimes I'll take a brush and kind of smooth that out so I can get a sense under the water to see how things are looking. And I can see there's kind of a spot here that I'm just gonna drag a little bit more material to blend. And then I'm just going to repeat that on this side. Grab some more clay for that. And then once I'm generally happy with the form, I'm going to let it dry completely before I assess to see whether I want to add more clay or move on by refining with sanding pads. So I have things kind of mostly shaped out, and I'm just doing a little bit of water work here to do some blending before I let it dry. I can already tell that maybe this spot might need a little bit more material added, but if I were to try to do that now, I think in pressing material in there, I would be disrupting the clay here. So I'm going to let this clay dry before I try to apply any more clay. So now that it's dry, I can take a good look at it, and as far as symmetry goes, this is kind of a smoother line and a more even transition that I'm looking for, whereas this one, it seems kind of sharp here. So I'm going to put a little bit more material there, and then I'm going to kind of add some more material to this side as well. So just like before, I'm just taking a damp clay shaper to kind of initially wet the spots where I anticipate adding material. And then I just kind of take my baggie of clay and sort of scoop off of the body there for when I'm just doing additions like this. And I'll kind of grab a piece and kind of work that in. I am holding my piece close to where I'm applying pressure and adding material. I wouldn't want to be like holding all the way over here and pushing. This clay does have a good amount of strength and flexibility, but you always want to support your piece, whether you're sanding or pressing to apply material. Whenever you're applying pressure, you want to make sure you're supporting your clay. So I'm kind of blending that out. Then I'm going to come back around to this side and add some material there too. Just kind of pick it up off my work surface with my clay shaper there. And then while I'm making these additions, I also always like to kind of flip it over and peek and see how I did on the back. And if there's any kind of empty holes or spots that clay needs blended out or added. So those additions have dried, and now I'm going to come in with a sanding stick to do a little bit of shaping, and then I'm going to follow it up with fine, superfine, ultrafine, and microfine sanding pads to get a really nice finish on this clay. And I start off with a sanding stick, and I kind of just follow shapes and forms. And this is just to remove any high areas really quickly. And again, I'm supporting my piece while I'm doing this. And this is just to kind of, again, remove high areas and smooth things out a little bit. And this clay is really nice because it sands to be a really, really kind of soft, fine grain. And there's kind of a color change. So I can see here that there's kind of a low spot there because it's substantially lighter. And I can decide to either take all this clay around it down to that, or I could come in and fill that later. But this clay sands really readily, and it sands to be super smooth. So I have my form mostly established here on the outside, and I'm gonna flip it over a little bit to address the inside, but I mostly sand the inside with the sanding pads because it's kind of a curved shape, and it's easier to follow a curve with these flexible pads. But I can kind of see right here, there's kind of a high area that's at a sort of flat spot that I'm going to try to take down really quickly. And now I'm going to switch to my sanding pads. So again, I'm starting with fine. And these are great for cleaning up the interior because, like I was just saying, they can follow that curve really easily. And I've got my hand behind my setting, supporting this from the back while I'm applying my pressure on the inside here. And then I'm going to go ahead and clean up the scratches that I made with that sanding stick on the outside here as well. And then I'm just going to work my way down from fine to superfine, ultrafine, and microfine. So I've sanded all the way up to microfine, and this just feels really, really silky, smooth, and soft. And once it's fired, it's going to shine up beautifully. So at this point, I would want to use a disposable applicator brush with some alcohol and just clean up the stones. And the front, always kind of check the back too. And then we're ready to fire. For firing this bangle, I would want it to be supported. So you can either fire it in a fused silica dish filled with alumina hydrate or filled with vermiculite. But for these bracelets, I like to ramp them to 1550, and then in the instructions, they recommend a 2 to 3 hour hold if you plan on bending the piece post-fire. And just because as this sinters, it might kind of distort to be slightly ovular or not absolutely perfect, I want to be able to correct its form once it's been fired, and that might require some bending. So I'm going to fire this bangle at 1550 for a 3 hour hold. I have another bangle here that has already been fired, and you can probably tell that it's not 100% a perfect circle anymore. So I'm going to be taking it over a wooden mandrel, and I just use my hands really to kind of gently press against the mandrel to round out its form. And I'll kind of, since it is tapered, I'll flip and apply from the other side too. I like using wooden mandrels. Every once in a while I've done rings where I have this similar kind of setting and transition to band, and when I've used a mallet around kind of like a setting, I think the collet might get pushed back a little bit and it hits the steel, and I think that, and combined with the tension from the clay around the setting, perhaps my stone will crack. So I like using the wooden mandrels. I think you're way less likely to crack a stone when you're doing some gentle adjustments using a wooden mandrel in just your hands. And here are my finished bangles. I happen to have a lot of purple, lavender, and amethyst CZs on hand, so I worked with those alongside some white CZs, and I think it makes for a really cohesive stack where the stones kind of all complement each other and they look nicely worn together. These bangles are really fun because you could work with any shape or color of stone that you'd like that can be fired up to 1550 for 3 hours. I can't wait to see how you build up your bangle stack. Thanks for watching.